Welcome to the Mind Solution podcast with Sarah Maud. The Mind Solution podcast is for leaders like you who are passionate about well-being in the workplace because you understand that a strong, resilient and happy workforce is the key to your organisation's success. The Mind Solution podcast is here to help you. So join us every week where we'll share with you powerful insights, strategies and know-how to ensure that your people and your organisation are truly thriving from the inside out. David, I'm like a child at Christmas about the fact that I am here with you. I know we've already launched into a massive conversation before I pressed record, but honestly, I can't tell you just how thrilled I am because we've met numerous times, and I've been a huge fan of your work for about 10 years. I've been flogging your books to my clients for about 10 years. I'm sure that commission check is in the post somewhere.
Well, thanks so much, Sarah. Thanks for inviting me on. Given that we've met all these times and I've passed if I'm on your podcast now, so I'll take that as a compliment. So it's very kind of you to invite me on. So thanks for that and for your kind words as well.
It's a joy. It really is a joy. And it's also testament to the power of visualization, because I have visualized that I would be interviewing people like yourself and Dr. Joe Dispenza at some point in my work, in my business. So it's worked. We've done a study, and here you are. Poof, it works. Now, Dr. Joe, if you're listening to this, relax. I will get to you. I'm just a really busy woman, so just chill, and I'll get to you, Dr. Joe.
Nice one.
So here we are with your new book, your latest book, which I just love the title of, Why Woo-Woo Works. Now, you're preaching to the converted here, because I am trained in a whole host of woo-woo type modalities. But what I loved is the science that you bring to it. So talk me through what inspired you to write this, David.
Well, to be honest, for so long, I've seen what seems to be two different worlds. Like there's a world of people who are absolutely 100% in with complementary and alternative therapies, holistic therapies, and who completely reject everything over here. And if you would say this is mainstream. And yet there's many people who are totally 100% in the mainstream who think that's all rubbish. And I've always felt, and I've experienced myself on numerous occasions, that there's a fusion to be had. And maybe the future of healthcare doesn't have to be just that or just that, but maybe something in the middle where we take the best of that, the best of the West, and the best of all the rest, if you will, and sort of put them together. So, and it doesn't have to be 50-50. Sometimes it might be, 95% of this and 5% of that. Other times it might be 80-20, even 50-50. But other times there are several different situations where it might be 80% of that and 20% of that. But somewhere there, and it depends on the person, it depends on the condition, it depends on the context. But for most things, most of the time, you'll find that there's something to be had by some relative fusion of the two. And so what I thought is, so you get so much polarity in the world, and I think it's built into the way we think. Like something always has to be that, or it has to be X or Y, it has to be East or West, it has to be, inside or outside. And most of the things, even when we, when countries want to talk to each other, you have to find some middle ground. And so I felt with the book that I wanted to show what that middle ground could be by representing why this stuff over here, what people call woo-woo, actually works, and also show woo-woo people why that works as well, and say, look, if we do walk this ground, I think there's something really important in it for us. And that was really the idea, that was the, I guess, the narrative that I threaded through the book.
Yeah. And I love that. I really love that, because I think you're absolutely right that we can't have necessarily one without the other, but there is that fusion. Like, I know for myself, I have epilepsy, and if I didn't take medication, and I know this because I've tried to come off medication, I'd just be having seizures all over the place. But have I also used complementary therapy to help calm down the rate of those seizures? Yes. So was that Western world and that woo-woo world a wonderful combination? Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that, because I think a lot of people have had that kind of experience. And what I actually did is show why it's so obvious. I mean, for example, someone who has, let's say, high blood pressure or is highly strung, and they might take some medication, but we know that there's lots of research that says what you can do as well, sometimes instead, is change your diet, get some exercise. But I've got a big chapter on the healing power of nature and showed why that in the whole span of human evolution, humans have spent, our ancestral humans have spent 99.99% of our time in natural surroundings, so in green spaces around trees and grass and flowers and the sounds of birds and other animals, and only 0.01% of our time in blocky, grey, built-up surroundings with glass window panels, only 0.01% of our time. Now, over eons of evolution, our human ancestors experienced a relative state of calm relative to our ordinary modern humans, where stress is something that runs in the background due to the pace of life for most of the time. So over eons of time, what happened? And this is taught in academia, and it's just what I thought, I'm going to bring this out into the open and let people understand it. And what happened over eons is the relative state of calm of the human nervous system began to become associated with natural surroundings. So nowadays, in the modern day, the moment we experience nature, the human nervous system moves towards a calm state. It's called parasympathetic dominance. And then that activates natural wellness processes. The body begins to heal by itself. I mean, it doesn't mean not mean you hug a tree and it'll cure cancer. I don't mean that at all. But the body starts to move towards an optimum state, and it begins to find balance all by itself. And so, you know, even just realizing that's, we might have called that woo-woo, go out into nature, it'll do you good, but it really does. And I quoted lots of research. For example, hospital patients who are in a room with a window offering them a view of nature tend to recover faster than people who have an identical hospital room, but the window is of another hospital building or a car park. So those who recover faster, because the only difference in the room is the window offers them a view of nature, and that makes their recovery in mental and physical health that little bit faster. It's because of this inbuilt natural thing. So even that, many people would consider that a woo-woo idea. So I point out that nature is something we should build into our wellness, regardless of what else we're doing, at all times.
It's interesting you say that, because actually the theme for the whole mental health awareness this year was around nature, because as we know, over the last 18 months, so many of us have been confined to our living quarters and haven't been able to travel. And that's still the case in many countries. And so for some people that live in the middle of cities, whether that's London or whether that's, well, I suppose New York, you've got Central Park, but where nature's maybe a little bit lacking, that has been an impact on people's mental and physical well-being, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And it's been advantageous for people when they can to get out and get a wee bit of nature, even bring nature in. Even if here's another one, hospital patients tend to have less pain when the room has plants adorned with plants. And scientists did studies where they created identical rooms and they brought plants, particularly flowering plants, into the rooms and left them out of other rooms, and people's pain levels were less in rooms that had the plants in them. And the reason for that, again, is the nervous system, when it recognizes something natural, it moves towards parasympathetic dominance. Now, one of the things that does is that reduces the intensity of pain that people experience, because the intensity of pain is increased when our nervous system goes the other way, when we're feeling a wee bit stressed. And so stress can, and most people have had that experience, that stress amplifies or exacerbates pain. So it's good to see scientific research suggesting, we might in some cases just bring nature into the living quarters, and that can help a little bit. We might be able to swap, a paracetamol occasionally for a daffodil, not to eat, but just to observe it. I'm making light, but there's definitely truth in that kind of thing.
Maybe that's I live right by the sea in Portobello in Edinburgh, and David and I are both in Scotland, so we know what the temperatures are like at this time of year. And it always amazes me that at about 6:30 in the morning, as I'm walking to the gym, there are people in the sea. And this morning I was thinking, oh, you're brave. Yeah. You're embracing nature, and you're really brave.
My goodness. Well, that is, I haven't plucked up the courage for that sort of thing, but I have heard about it. And it might be, although I do like to finish off my showers in the morning with really cold water. And, there's actually, this isn't something I explored in the book, but scientifically, exposure to cold temperatures does actually slow down the rate of biological aging. And it does it because inside our cells, we have a couple of little enzymes, and they're called sirtuins. And what they do is they clean the environment around our genes, and they allow our natural repair processes to work optimally. It's a bit like, a DVD. Over time, your picture gets a bit fuzzy. And the reason why it gets a bit fuzzy, if you've watched it like 100 times, is because it's picked up little micro scratches. And it's not that the data has been lost in the DVD, because it's always there. You just can't get to it because of the micro scratches. So inside the body, we have something equivalent. It's not micro scratches, but it's clutter in the cell, particularly around the reading of genes to keep us healthy and young. But what these sirtuins do, they act like little cleaning brushes, and they clean the environment, just like you could prolong the lifetime of a DVD if every time you used it, you cleaned it with a little brush. So what sirtuins are really just little cleaning brushes that clean that environment. And one of the ways that we activate them is exposure to cold temperatures.
Fascinating. So if I want to look 21 again, I just need to join them back in the sea.
Absolutely. Well, I've been doing it for 109 years, and I think I'm...
It's working. It's working.
Well, I appreciate that's very kind of you to say so.
Coming back to what we were talking about in terms of visualization, I loved the examples that you gave of people in the sporting world like Sally Gunnell and Ed Moses, who'd used the power of visualization with great success. And I know that there's so many examples in the sporting world where they really recognize that skill can take you so far, but that, with the right diet, the right rest, you can maintain that level of high performance, but to really get that additional edge, that they use the mind, and they get it in the sporting world. I know that, his name's gone out of my head, the world champion male tennis player.
Roger Federer?
No.
Rafa Nadal?
No, the one
Djokovic.
That's
Djokovic,
it.
Yeah.
So Djokovic won against Federer in the Wimbledon final several years ago, and he talked about how he'd used the power of visualization because he'd taken an unscheduled toilet break because he was getting thrashed by Federer, and he said that he'd gone into the bathroom and he just spent not very long, but he'd spent some time visualizing, and he'd come out and he was like a different man. And he went on to succeed, and now he's world champion. Now, what I find fascinating is working so much as we do in the corporate world. It feels like the corporate world, the business world, are a little bit lagging behind the sports world when it comes to really understanding what's needed to get to a high level of performance, but sustain that high level of performance. What's your thinking around that?
Well, actually, it's something I have actually taught in some corporate environments. And it's related to what Djokovic did, because one of the things that we can do to actually almost help us to become the leaders or the people that we want to be is to harness the power of the body-mind connection. Now, I said that the opposite way around from how I would normally talk about the mind-body connection. And that implies, in truth, that what goes on in your mind impacts your body. But I said it the other way around on purpose. The body-mind means that what happens to your body can inform your mind. And that is especially true when it comes to how you hold and move your body. So whether you have your back straight, or whether you're slouching, whether you have your shoulders relaxed, whether you even relax your facial muscles, all of these things, these states, like keeping your spine straight, relaxing your shoulders, relaxing your facial muscles, smiling, relaxing this muscle here, it's called your orbicularis oculi muscle, relaxing these muscles here. All of these things feed back into the brain and create a relaxed or optimum state. Now, you can practice that, but you can also accelerate it through visualization and regularly visualizing the person you want to be. So, for example, let's say someone was always nervous about giving presentations, but yet as working in sales, or perhaps as an executive having to give regular team meetings, regular presentations, always feel nervous. So what you could easily do for this is visualize yourself walking up to the front desk or the lectern, wherever you're presenting, and then beginning to deliver your talk. But not just, what most people do when they visualize presenting is they see the audience cheering at the end, but that's not what you do here. What you actually have to do is visualize kinesthetically. And what that means is imagine how it feels in your muscles. So as I get up from my seat, as my name is being announced, for example, what am I doing with my shoulders and my spine? So imagine dropping your shoulders, straightening your spine, and imagine how it feels to walk calmly, confidently, not overly confident, I'm going to give this super presentation, but in a way that represents the inner being, that the person that you want to be. You want to be someone who's quietly confident and humble, but yet really humble, but really confident inside, believes in yourself. Then how would you wear that on your body? What would your shoulders be doing, your spine be doing? What would your face and your neck and your eyes be doing? And visualize that whole process of movement as you move to the front of the room or the lectern. And then imagine yourself, the words that you're saying as you begin your speech, but how you say those words, how you move your shoulders, and the rate of your speech. And all of these things inform the brain. And research shows that when your brain doesn't distinguish real from imaginary. So when you visualize this kind of stuff, you begin to train your brain circuits until when you find yourself in that situation, that type of movement happens by itself. And therefore that calm state happens by itself. We might have thought of that as a kind of woo-woo thing, but it's really true-woo. That is factually correct. A good way of using visualization in a corporate arena to almost train yourself in your imagination to be the person. And that's pretty much what Djokovic did. He wasn't just visualizing, I'm going to hit the ball there. He was visualizing the mechanical feelings, because sometimes when you lose, I know this as a tennis player, I live in Dunblane and I play tennis. And sometimes when you're not feeling it, it's because of something mechanical in a movement that's just a little bit clunky. So what you do sometimes is you visualize the smooth, how does it feel to take the racket over and do a serve or do a forehand? How does that feel? How should it feel? And that's what you do in kind of sports. And it applies exactly in the corporate arena for being that which you wish to be, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember I've coached one of the world champion boxers, And he talked very openly about visualization, and he would visualize constantly throughout the day the sound of the bell ringing, the sound of the commentator, you know, being there in the ring, putting his arms up, and he's still the world champion. So
Wow.
we can't dismiss this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what I love about it is, if we think again about kind of people in the business world, you know, they might be listening to this and they might be thinking, yeah, but I'm not a tennis player and I'm not a 100-meter sprinter. But it's also about, how do I want to create my day? Because I hear so many times people say, you know, today's going to be really stressful. And I'm like, you don't know that. All you can do is predict that, because all you know about is what's happening in the moment. Instead, what you're doing is you're looking at your calendar and you're going, oh, I've got that one-to-one with my boss, I've got that presentation, I've got this, I've got that. And you're making a huge assumption, which of course your body's just going to respond to as well, because you visualized worst case scenario. You visualize what you don't want to experience, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And what happens is, when you arrive in that experience, what you've been imagining to be true and feeling to be true begins to inform how you behave, and therefore you recreate the very thing that you would imagine, that you were afraid of, because that's what you've programmed the brain. And you know, it actually has its roots in something very like the way belief alters biology. Let me explain this in the context of the placebo effect. So I've written a lot about the placebo effect. My former career was in research and development in the pharmaceutical industry. And when a person, let's say, takes a painkiller, or gets a placebo, but they believe it's a painkiller. So a doctor has reassured them that this will help you, but it's actually that little white tablet isn't paracetamol, it's actually just a sugar tablet. But here's the thing, about 70% of the time, depending on the context, depending on the doctor, the language, except about 70% of the time, you'll find that the pain will reduce. But it hasn't just reduced as a figment of the imagination, it actually has reduced. And you know why it's reduced? Because the belief and the expectation of reduction in pain actually causes the brain to produce its own painkillers. And it's the brain's version of morphine, actually. The brain has its own version of morphine. It's called an endogenous opiate. And so the brain produces its own painkillers as on account of the person's expectation, on account of what the person believes. Now, something very similar happens in our lives. That which we imagine and believe to be true, and therefore expect, really just through what you've described, our language, I'm going to have a terrible day kind of thing. What that actually does, it isn't necessarily producing chemical floating around in our life, but in something very similar way, by altering our brain networks and creating the feeling that we're expecting to feel. When we find ourselves in that experience, we clam up, and we end up feeling stressed because we're generating the biochemistry of stress, because that's what we expect, or we expected when we first began to think about it, when we got up out of our beds in the morning. And it sounds totally woo-woo, but in actual fact, imagining some of these things for the first 10 minutes before you get out of bed, imagining them going really well, imagining things being better than you could, doesn't guarantee it will be, but it can sometimes have a heck of a positive effect, you know, because you're not pre-programming yourself for stress. You're not changing your brain's biochemistry in relation to what that situation is supposed to be. You're actually doing it in a slightly different way. So there's a good chance that when you meet that situation, it could go the way that you want it to go, rather than what you've been expecting.
Yeah. And I love that, because when we do it, we're taking back control. We're creating the outcomes, because so many people, they give their power away to a condition. And whether that condition is a situation, whether it's a person, whether it's a meeting, a presentation, whatever it is in their life, they think that it's dependent on the situation about how we react. Now, we've got a wellbeing portal that is full of amazing resources, visualization, EFT videos. We've got you on our list of people to read about. And one of the things that we get so much feedback about is how, actually, I can create a situation. It's a bit like Joe Dispenza talks about the familiar past and the predictable future, but actually, you know, if we think about everything that we experience is through the maps and the models that we carry around inside our neurophysiology. So we can, to all intents and purposes, create our day as we want it to be, can't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And it does sort of parallel the way that the internal state of the brain to an extent does follow expectations and follow what we're imagining to be true. So, I mean, I use this kind of stuff regularly in my own life. I wouldn't use it if I didn't believe that it works. And if I didn't understand, well, for me, having a background in science, I always have to understand why something works. You know, often I don't, you know, I'd like to maybe take more things on faith, but I tend to always have to figure out the science of it. But I have figured out the science of it, and that these things really do have a significant effect. You know, here's another way that the brain doesn't really distinguish real from imaginary much of the time. There was a wee bit of research at Harvard a few years ago where volunteers were asked to play 5 notes on a piano. And they did this for 2 days on 5 consecutive days. And the region of the brain connected to the finger muscles grew but like a muscle. It's called neuroplasticity, but it grew substantially, 30 to 40 fold increase. But at the same time, a separate group of people, instead of playing the notes with their fingers, they were asked to play the notes in their mind. They closed their eyes and imagined it. And what was, for the same 2 hours and 5 consecutive days, what was amazing is the brain region changed in exactly the same region to exactly the same extent. And if you put the 2 brain scans side by side, you couldn't tell who was in the group of people who played the notes with their fingers and who was in the group who played the notes with their mind. A 30 to 40 fold increase in that region. In other words, in many ways, the brain doesn't make a distinction between whether something's actually happening or whether you're imagining it, which translates into life. Your brain can't tell the difference between whether you're actually in that meeting that you're dreading because you think it's going to go badly, or whether you're in that meeting, or whether you're just playing that in your imagination. So take it to the other extent. What if you imagine that outcome being really the way you want it to be? Then to the brain, that's actually happening. So your brain is now generating internal physiological states, informing your muscles, your heart rate, everything, so that that experience becomes real. Because as far as the brain's concerned, it is actually real, because the brain isn't drawing that distinction between whether it's happening now or whether it's just in your imagination.
Absolutely. And as a hypnotherapist, I know only too well that we can use that power. And it feels like when the business world really cotton on and really understand this through amazing books like you've written, that they will be able to tap into something which is really going to help them transform the health of their workforce. Because we know that, you know, over the last 18 months particularly, but not just the 18 months, for years, that we've seen rates of mental health increase, we've seen suicide rates increase. And I know for me, on a personal level, what I find very frustrating is that a lot of organizations still invest in old style, for want of a better word, practices. So people, for example, they might be referred to counselling and they might be referred to CBT. Now, not wishing to undermine any of the counselling and CBT worlds, but we know, and what I loved about your book, it proved this, that actually if people had access to, say, EFT, emotional freedom technique, or they had access to other complementary therapies, they could resolve what was being experienced, like anxiety. Sometimes anxiety can be resolved in a couple of really powerful sessions, whereas with counselling, they might just be in there for 12, 13, 14 weeks, going round and round in circles because they're only accessing the prefrontal cortex.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's so much. It comes back to that fusion. It doesn't. We've become habituated in thinking that's the only way to achieve something. But there's so many different approaches, and what might work for one person might not necessarily work for another person. I mean, sometimes a person who's experiencing mild to moderate depression might be prescribed antidepressants, which haven't been shown to be that much better than placebos for mild to moderate depression. Now, for some people, it might be the magic bullet and it might really work, and it obviously does for a lot of people. But there's a lot of people in that group who would probably benefit really well from what's called a restorative experience. And a restorative experience is anything, whether it's nature or a complementary therapy or a different type of approach that you were explaining there, anything that can shift the body towards a state of parasympathetic dominance, meaning a state of rest and relax. Because sometimes mild to moderate depression can be very related to a background simmering stress and worries and fears that just kind of spills over. I'm not meaning to say it's all this way, because people who feel depressed or anxious, it can occur for a number of different reasons. I've experienced depression a few times in my life, and it can occur for a number of different reasons. But that is why we should think of maybe there's something in this kind of middle ground. That doesn't mean that the answer is always there. It certainly is for a lot of the time, and I'm absolutely not knocking that. I used to build medicines as a chemist, so I know that they work. But I'm saying that there's sometimes a restorative experience. For many people might actually be more of what they need. Maybe they need a bit of both, half of that and half of that, rather than all of that and none of that, and I think there's something, coming back to what we said earlier, I think there's something to be had in this kind of fusion, bringing more restorative, and this is what many complementary and alternative therapies do, is they provide a restorative setting. Before any technique is actually applied, they provide a restorative experience, which moves the body to a state of balance all by itself before they actually do say or do anything at all.
Yes. I know earlier this year we ran a pilot because people were starting to go back to the workplace, and there was huge amounts of anxiety in, traveling, because not everybody drives. What if I've got to get on a train? Well, if I've got to get on a bus, worries about health anxiety, any number of things that were creating that internal state of anxiety. And one of the modalities that I'm trained in is called MAP. Now, MAP is something which uses what we would call, because it's a bit sexier to call it this, the superconscious mind, which effectively is infinite intelligence. It's that life force. So, a lot of people have heard probably about the conscious mind and the unconscious mind, but not necessarily about that superconscious mind. And that we work with that superconscious mind, and we can work with it in a group, and nobody even has to say anything. We literally just lead them through this protocol. And absolutely everybody, they started by just putting in the chat function where they were on a scale of 0 to 10 about how they felt about returning to work. And I would say that probably about 80% of them were over a SUDS level of 8. Now, SUDS, subjective unit of discomfort. We didn't need to understand why. We didn't even need to understand what their thoughts were. All we needed to do was get them to just explore those thoughts and feelings, and then give instructions to the superconscious mind to treat and neutralize things. And every single one of them finished at a 0. Wow. And that was achieved in less than an hour.
Wow, that's
now, to be able to take that, as we're doing, into the workforce, we could have 1,000 people on a webinar that they don't have to say anything, so they can feel safe, they can have their camera off, and we can take people from that really heightened state of emergency alert to 0. I mean, for anybody listening, you can get in touch with us right now at info@themindsolution.com. But it's proof that this is really leading edge. It feels like we're really on the leading edge of transforming the health and well-being of the workplace with this not new understanding, but getting, as you say, them to fuse their approaches, aren't we?
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that kind of thing. In fact, the idea of the superconscious in the West, we refer to that. In the East, they have philosophy that loosely it means non-duality, that the core of your identity, your being, is a non-dual state of being. It's not mind and matter. It's not consciousness and matter as two different things, but the same thing appearing in different ways. And so in the West, the philosophy is called idealism. It's the same idea. It's just the same. In academic philosophy, it's called idealism, but in the East, they call it non-duality. But the idea being that the core, the superconscious, the core of your being is an infinite state of being that has no experience of worry or fear or stress or anxiety, that only sees things whole and complete and fluid, if you will. So the idea of sometimes recognizing that portion of us exists, and that I am more than just this thing that currently little processes in my brain are creating stress hormones in my body because I'm thinking about something over there. If I can expand my idea of myself from this to something more infinite, then I think for many people, research shows that when people expand their perception of who they believe themselves to be, then levels of stress and anxiety dramatically drop. So I can see why that technique, because it sounds quite like you've structured it and created it in a way that anyone can use. I can see why that would be quite effective.
Oh, incredibly. It's, being trained in a number of modalities, it's mind-blowing. It's absolutely mind-blowing what it's achieved. But there are so many modalities out there that really are. I always remember one lady who'd been carrying grief for over 30 years about the death of her dad and the suicide of her sister. And she came to me and we used something called havening, which is one of the techniques on our wellbeing portal. And we released those feelings of grief in literally under 10 minutes. So all of that she'd been carrying for 30 years, and it was just neutralized. She's like a new woman. It's amazing. So I love what your book is doing, David, because it is really getting people to wake up to that knowledge that, we don't have to stay in therapy for years and years and years, because I sometimes think that's the perception that people have of therapy, isn't it?
Definitely. I think that's just kind of historically, but as we're beginning to recognize there is a lot of power in some other techniques, that there's something to be had in the middle ground. There's definitely a fusion to be had. Funnily enough, talking about stress and stuff in the brain, the neurological and physiological opposite of stress is, in fear and anxiety, is kindness. And what I mean by that is, stress is a feeling. You feel stress because two people can be in the same situation. One person feels stress, one person doesn't. The person who feels stress will flood their brain and body with stress hormones like adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine. And these are produced because the person feels stressed. Physiologically and neurologically, the opposite feeling is feelings induced by kindness. And what they do is they create not stress hormones, but kindness hormones. I call them kindness hormones. The main one is also called the love drug, the hugging hormone, the cuddle chemical. But I call them kindness hormones to really draw that parallel that with stress, that they're produced because of how something feels. So stress hormones are produced because of how stress feels. Kindness hormones are produced because of how kindness feels. What's remarkable is neurologically and physiologically, kindness hormones do the opposite from stress hormones. So stress hormones dial up the region of the brain that's associated with stress, worry, fear, anxiety, that kind of stuff. Almost like you're turning a dimmer switch and dialing something up. Kindness hormones do the exact opposite. They dial it down the other way. They literally turn it down. So stress hormones turn it up, kindness hormones turn it down. Similarly, stress hormones can lead to less connectivity in frontal regions of the brain, particularly in the medial and slight bias to the left, whereas kindness hormones do the exact opposite. They help to fertilize and grow these regions of the brain. In the heart, stress hormones can increase blood pressure, kindness hormones decrease blood pressure. Stress hormones can actually cause inflammation throughout the body. Kindness hormones are anti-inflammatory throughout the body. So sometimes the fastest way to manage stress in the moment is to be kind, even to close your eyes and think of someone you care about. And just for 2 minutes, just think of many reasons why you value and appreciate that person's presence in your life. You might recall specific instances, or you might just reflect on their personality, but allow yourself to feel how that feels. And you're immediately beginning to dial down the neurological and physiological effects of stress hormones.
Yeah. And it's fascinating that you say that, because one of the big things that we offer as an organization is management mental health training. And apart from helping people to understand what do we mean by management mental health, what is mental health, and skills to help have effective conversations, we also do talk about empathy. And empathy, kindness kind of go hand in hand. And whilst it's not a manager's role to diagnose or feel that they need to fix people that are struggling, actually just holding that space for them, whether it's in a room or it's as we're talking here, and having that really connected conversation where you're just giving that person your attention and you're just listening, can have a profound impact on the individual that's experiencing that as well, can't it?
Absolutely, without a doubt. In fact, empathy is, I think of empathy as a currency of exchange, but rather than monetary exchange, it's a currency that allows us to understand and relate to each other. In medicine, when doctors show high empathy, patients recover faster. There was one study, over 700 patients treated for symptoms of the common cold, and they were covertly asked to give a rating of the doctor empathy. It was called a care consultation and relational empathy care. And those who scored the doctor a perfect 10, high empathy, recovered from the same symptoms about 50% faster than everyone else, and their immune response was about 50% higher. Now, similarly, in European studies, patients with prostate cancer, when they've had a high empathy doctor, they end up 3 months later with higher natural killer cells, the natural immune killer cells, meaning they kill cancer cells, in their bloodstream, even 3 months after having a high empathy doctor. Similarly, people with asthma, interstitial colitis, many different, even Crohn's, have lower inflammation when they've had high empathy doctors compared with if they've not had high empathy doctors. So one of the things that happen is there are physiological reactions in the body to being listened to, feeling that this person's listening to me, and your body goes into a state of calm. But it's not just the nervous system. There's actually, biological shifts in the body as the body moves towards a more optimum state, just because someone listened to you, someone gave that space.
And it's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I think in today's world where people are so busy, they're very switched on, they've usually got, their phone two meters away from them, not 2 meters, because then you'd have Mr. Gadget arms. They've got them right there. And I know certainly from the training that we do with managers, they start out thinking that they're quite empathetic. They start out thinking that they're good listeners. And then we have a series of exercises that we put them through, and they kind of go, okay, so I've not really been listening. I've just been waiting for a pause in the conversation to respond to that person, or to tell them what they should do, or to try and give advice. But thinking about what we were talking about in terms of the truth of who we really are and that connectedness, that actually when we are really listening, and how we drop away from that intellectual exchange and come down into that connected exchange, that's where the beauty, the magic, the sweet spot is. If you were to help people understand what's actually happening there at a physiological and neurological level, what would you say, David?
Well, we, the human species, we as individuals are genetically wired for connection. In fact, the genes that govern that drive to connect are some of the oldest in the human genome. They're about 500 million years old, give or take a day or two. Really good. But they're about 500 million years old, and they're conserved. And what that means, conserved, is this, that we still have them 500 million years later. And what conserved means is no matter what's happened throughout evolution, we still have those genes because they're of a vital importance. But what they majorly do is draw us to connect with one another. It's why feeling rejected hurts, because what's really doing on a physiological level, it's saying, I'm not able to connect here. And there's a biological drive to connect. And that's why it hurts. It's why it hurts when someone breaks up. It's why it hurts. You know, one of the worst punishments in hundreds of years ago a person could ever experience is being banished from their village or town. And many people would be within a few weeks that they're just living on the outskirts of the village, desperate for connection again, because it's biologically wired into us. It's one of our most natural impulses, is to connect with one another. So this is why I call it a currency. The doorway to connection is empathy.
Yeah.
That's how we do it. It's just, and it's genuine. It's got to be genuine. The doorway to connection is genuine empathy. And empathy means I feel with you. It's slightly distinct from compassion, which essentially means I feel for you. And the difference is, empathy is I'm with you. I'm not thinking of what I'm going to say next. I'm not thinking of a solution here. I'm just here with you, sharing your experience completely openly, and I have no agenda. I'm literally listening to, I feel with you. Compassion, I feel for you, is all of that, but now I'm also thinking, is there some way that I can help to free you from your suffering? Yeah. You know, just a slight distinction, empathy and compassion. It's like empathy is like a seed, and it grows a stem, and the stem is compassion. And in time, eventually, compassion evolves into, well, now I'm going to say or do something. I'm no longer just wishing you freedom from your suffering. I will now say or do something that might help you. So that blooms like a flower, blooms into an act of kindness. So empathy becomes compassion, becomes kindness, but it always starts with empathy. I feel with you. I have no agenda, just in this moment. And that's when you feed the body's biochemistry in the most optimum way. That's when it's really getting what it needs, because that's how we're wired to care for one another.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I think we could all do with caring for one another right now, couldn't we?
Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt.
Well, David, I could go on talking to you all day. I really could.
Me too. To you, not to myself.
But thank you so much. For anybody that is listening that is keen to get their hands on this wonderful, wonderful book, where's the best place that they can reach it?
It's on Amazon in most countries, I think, and it's also in what I think in the UK, Waterstones, in the US, Barnes and Noble. I think in many shops it will actually be there, or it will at least be available to order. Plus, all the links to everything's on my website anyway, drdavidhamilton.com.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Connectedly, so much for this opportunity. I absolutely love every time that we get to have it together and have a conversation. And I'm sure that that's given a lot of people a lot of food for thought about how they can be the best version of themselves, take back control, and we can learn to be kinder, especially if it's anti-aging. I mean, what more motivation do you need?
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David.
My pleasure.
Now.
Bye-bye.